surely if you invest in the machinery of people, the software up here and the hardware in their body, they're going to be better employees. And then I deep dived into the research. It was obvious internationally it was $1 trillion problem. Health and well-being of people impact businesses more so than almost any other cost in a business. So you're spending money on your people as payroll. It's the biggest line item on your profit and loss. And the question was, if you invest in those people's health and well-being, will that return or generate dividends for the business? And in turn, would people be healthier? And there's a true win-win.
Today on It's Never About Money, I'm joined by Dr Patrick Aouad, neurologist, healthcare innovator, and founder, CEO of CU Health. Pat is an internationally published specialist in clinical neurology with expertise in neuroimmunology and multiple sclerosis. But beyond the clinic, he operates at the intersection of neuroscience, prevention, and business, helping organizations and individuals rethink how they access healthcare and prioritize long-term well-being. Through CU Health, his digital-first platform, he focuses on preventative health, mental well-being, and reducing chronic disease risk, particularly in workplace settings where poor health carries a significant economic burden. Today, we're exploring the real return on investing in your health and why well-being might be the most undervalued asset in modern life. Pat, welcome.
Thank you, Joe.
So excited to have you. As we discussed pre-show, the idea of being able to use our workplaces as a medium or a way of being able to really help people with their health outcomes, both at work, obviously, which has a benefit at work, but also beyond that, is really important. I just wanted to sort of start with what your journey has been to get yourself to this point into this sort of health tech area.
Yeah, thanks, Joe. Look, to say it was planned would be a lie. It certainly wasn't planned. But
Yeah.
at the same time, without sounding too epic, I feel like it was a bit destined because I'm a very curious person. And for me, it was really about following my instincts toward, using different elements of my own interest areas, which were to connect with people, to improve the quality of life for people and find fulfillment through my professional life that way. With a deep interest in science growing up, I went down the pathway that connected those two things, humans and science. Medicine sort of fulfilled that bucket. Having said that, I have always been interested in the way things work generally, whether it's how a car works or how you get to the moon and stuff like that. I've always been a very curious science sort of focused person. And then in pursuing neurology and neuroscience, I found a great degree of sort of passion, and it's quite a mystery box of brain, so to speak. It doesn't make intuitive sense, like your bones make sense. Your skeleton that holds your body up, and your heart makes sense. It pumps blood round and around, but the brain's quite a sort of non-intuitive organ that you wouldn't know evolutionarily that you think and dream with your brain. You wouldn't know it. It's just not obvious to start with. So we had to discover this stuff through a lot of scientific exploration and research and trial and error, and we got there. It turns out your brain controls everything, and what I found fascinating in the early days was this nexus, this connection between the brain being the place that helps you walk, move, speak, smell, taste, but also the place that makes you dream and feel and aspire and suffer. It's all in the brain and the mind are the same organ. So that for me was really a sort of a revelation around how does this organ dictates your quality of life in so many ways. And so from there I became a neurologist, which is obviously a highly specialized field in medicine. And the areas that we focus on are what a lot of people know about, things like stroke, Parkinson's disease and epilepsy. Multiple sclerosis, you mentioned, is an area that I delved into more deeply, and I have a lot of MS patients, and it's been an amazing career to help solve very important medical problems for people in the prime of their lives. But I had this itch around sort of how can I explore creatively and more systemically in a structural way improvements to accessing care. How do we upstream before people end up, taking many, many sick days off, and they're impacting their family life and impacting their entire many years sometimes of their life. You get one shot at this. So I started to explore other ways of accessing healthcare. So that I started off with my entrepreneurial journey started off with medical education, which was a very light step, sort of a comfortable, safer step, which is where I was imparting knowledge and expertise and experience to specialists coming through the system to help them get through, which is a real challenge. It's getting through medical training is hard enough, let alone specialist training. So there's a lot of hurdles, and I got through mine, and I, with some colleagues of mine, we got together and we started helping educate specialists coming through. And I checked the other day in our system, there's over 2,000 medical specialists that we've educated in some way over the last decade through that. So that's a legacy that I'm proud of and continue to invest in and be part of. And then from there, I thought, this isn't what's the next step in business? I see people doing a lot of business. To be honest, I saw a lot of people that probably weren't as dedicated to a cause or a real solution necessarily, but they would see business for the dollar. And I think that the name of this show, it's not about the money or whatever, is like resonates with that. So I thought, surely there's a way of aligning sustainable business and growth with values, outcomes that matter and can help improve society. So that's where I got interested in general practice, actually, because I saw general practice as the coalface where people show up each day with problems, and it had become a very reactive industry, not because the doctors want to practice that way, but just because the way in which it had been corporatized and the way in which it had been commercialized. So the question I had was, is there a way of returning general practice to a more holistic, deep, slow-paced care rather than a volume-based care model? And would that lead to better outcomes? Is there a way of doing it, and is there a way of doing it that makes it more accessible for people? It turns out that at the end of the day, there's a government that supports it and there are people that subsidize it. And it's been like that for many, many years. So then the next step, for me, I don't stop until I get to the solution. The next step was, where else is there money in the economy that can support health and well-being, but that would benefit from that investment? And then I deep dived into the business world, and it was clear that there's money in the business world that exists. There's profit in the business world that exists. We know that. There's investment in people in the business world. We spend most of our waking life at work. So it's such a massive time cost throughout our entire, expanse of our life. It's about a third of our productive life, or our life where we're able to do things and build our families and go on holidays and not be, encumbered by pain and sorts of things. So I was like, well, surely if you invest in the machinery of people, the software up here and the hardware in their body, they're going to be better employees. And then I deep dived into the research. It was obvious internationally it was $1 trillion problem. Health and well-being of people impact businesses more so than almost any other cost in a business. So you're spending money on your people. As payroll, it's the biggest line item on your profit and loss. And the question was, if you invest in those people's health and well-being, will that return or generate dividends for the business? And in turn, would people be healthier? And there's a true win-win. And the business case for CU Health started there. And so for me, that's why it wasn't planned. It was sort of a following the evidence, following instinct toward an actual solution to a real problem. And that's where we've landed today.
I feel like sometimes there comes a point in time in people's lives where they're looking for the ability to create win-wins, the ability to commercialize something so that they can look after their families, but do something meaningful and more impactful than perhaps they had been previously. It's interesting that as good as the work was in being a neurologist, it seems like perhaps for you that the ability to help people with the outcomes of their diseases was almost limiting compared to being able to, at scale, being able to create a solution so that people perhaps don't get into that situation or you can limit that somewhat in some way. Would that be part of the kind of intuitive
spot
journey?
on. I mean, in medicine, we've got a saying, treat the patient, not the disease. And so in neurology, you're focused on treating the disease, but if you're a good doctor or you practice the art of medicine, you're wrapping that treatment around the patient's context, their socioeconomic background, their education level, their culture, their beliefs, and that's the way you get a better outcome. Now, when you look at society at large, the number one morbidity, i.e. the burden that most people carry in our society, relates to their mental well-being, their mental health. So for me, it was like, well, I can help navigate someone through a complex decision-making process in relation to a specific disease. But if there are ways to elevate people's mental well-being, their mental capabilities, their capacity, their emotional health, also too, we know that heart disease, stroke, to a great extent, dementia, cancers, and so forth. We all know. It's just common sense now how preventable they are. I didn't get out here to, manufacture some magic juice that prevents all of these things. I know that it takes many incremental touch points and interventions over time, much like raising a child. You can't do it in a day or with a special tonic. You've got to do it continuously. And, I've got kids, so I'm speaking from, and I'm still struggling with it. This morning was chaos.
Experience.
Yeah, absolutely chaos. But at the end of the day, if you can get that right, that stuff right, it's almost like that concept, Joe, of, in some countries we're worried about, the living to 142 years old, the longevity. And then in other countries, they don't have clean drinking water, right? So, or access to antibiotics. So the point I'm making is if you can get clean drinking water into that country, you're going to make a substantial benefit. There's going to be a substantial benefit downstream for everything beyond that. And when you look at Western society, well, what's the point in living till you're 142 if most people can't feel fulfilled or not suffer during it? It's sort of just a vanity metric. So for me, it was like, well, how do you make it more equitable? But then at the same time, without being a bleeding heart and too fluffy, how do you make equitable access to high quality care a profit center for the commercial world? How do you align those two things? And that was a challenge I really wanted to take on, because I love a seat at the table with the boards, and and my challenge was to convince them that investing in this kind of care actually wasn't some sort of social security. It was a superpower. It's like AI. It's actually a strategic advantage. And so I think I just loved the idea of that challenge and solving that equation, and then had to find the tools to do it.
So that it sounds like in this particular episode, we're going to be talking about the fact that health is very related to money, and there's kind of like a, if you will, a silent tax on productivity.
Correct. I agree.
And even to an extent, your capacity to amass career capital over time is really linked to these sort of health outcomes. So can you walk us through how there is a silent tax on productivity, and what is the evidence there, and how you would be able to convince an organization that, improving health outcomes, I mean, intuitively it makes sense, but how do you put some quantifiable data around that? How do you provide the evidence that that's the case?
This is such a great question, Joe, and it's really interesting. So that you can approach a question like that anecdotally, like you say, common sense, intuitively, and really interestingly, in more recent discussions with CEOs that are leaders and that have read the evidence, understand it, and also intuitively themselves as leaders understand it. Humans are messy. We're fallible. We've got it's our mess that we bring into work when we try to overcome and be productive. That is a limiter. It's a brake. It's a sort of it is a bottleneck for performance. So they know that, and the leaders that know that say, "Pat, I don't even need you to provide me with a table or a complex formula. I don't care. It's obvious. We're going to do it. It looks like it's value. It's cost effective. It aligns with budgets. We can take a little bit from over here that maybe we were investing incorrectly, and I'm really loving seeing that, because to me that's actual intelligence and wisdom combined, and then just making decisions. Because the efficiency of decision making is also a superpower. If you can make effective decisions efficiently, the sunk cost that you recover through because the bureaucracy of metrics and data itself is actually a bit of a joke, but unfortunately, large organizations rely on that for governance, require it. So then you move on to, okay, well, if the top line is not sufficient, you then need to get into the trenches and roll your sleeves up and provide something substantial, even though it's obvious. And one of the things that I think humans struggle with is it's frustrating to have to prove what we know to be true. However, we go into that. So when you look at the behaviors of human beings at work, we all know that people rock up, and if you look at 10 different people, they're going to come to work with different levels of what I would call discretionary effort or disposable energy or whatever you want to call it. But basically, they're coming into work either below the line, so in negative territory, at which point they're going to be a risk. And that risk to the business then comes in the form of a governance-related risk. It might be that, they're an increased workers' compensation claim risk. They may be a reputational risk to the organization because they might offend stakeholders, clients, collaborators, vendors, suppliers, whatever it might be. They may be a resource risk because when someone is coming in with negative, what I call negative well-being or negative discretionary effort, they actually become a sinkhole for the HR department because you're there putting so many resources into trying to mitigate harm for that individual when the others that need reinforcement and coaching and go. So there's all of these. That's down the sort of very red end of the curve, if you like. It's not the optimization end; it's the risk end. So at that point, you're looking at, okay, well, this person might leave the organization. They might blame the organization for their situation. So there's attrition and retention risk. So you start moving up the curve a little bit towards employee value proposition. So if employees, one, are struggling and two, don't feel cared for, the perception of care isn't there. There's actual care and there's perception of care. They're both very important. But if they don't feel cared for after a period of time, they will leave. And we know the cost of attrition is huge. We know the cost of business continuity there is huge. The cost of recruitment is massive. And then the cost of retraining is massive. And again, the ripple effect of that cost is huge in an organization because the business leaders or the HR leaders or the line manager or whatever they are retraining and recruiting, which shifts focus away from optimization, which is where you want to be in a company. Where you want to be as a leader in the company is, my team's great. They've got support structures in place. We're doing a good job with the way in which we've got organizational well-being. We've got personal supports in place. So now we're focusing on optimization and performance. So now you move on to that stage. Now, optimization and performance, well, that could be, for some businesses, excessive sick days or unnecessary or avoidable, let's call them preventable or avoidable sick days, greatly impact the business. That could be in professional services where billable hours are the way in which revenue is generated. It could be in childcare or in healthcare industry where rostering is a huge problem when you're looking at ratios and serviceability. It can be in retail where you need to keep the shop open and you've got to get a casual to come in. So avoidable or preventable sick days are a huge headache, and they can certainly be have an impact on revenue, productivity, profitability. And then you move into the really where all organizations wish they were, which is you've got low attrition, good continuity of intellectual property within the business, good communication and good discretionary effort amongst all their members of the team. So they're thinking empathetically, creatively, strategically. And even if they've got what you call, an entry role, they're at least in a good headspace where they're going to be polite stakeholders, customers. They're going to be safe on the tools if they're in manufacturing. They're not falling asleep on the job or anxious and making mistakes. So when you're up that other end for performance, what you're really looking for there are people that are doing a good job. You're moving into high performance. You're not just moving into, everyone's stable. You're then moving into how do you get 1 + 1 = 10? That's when you can play into people's strengths. You're able to call on people to do extra for you when you need them. It's much like a good footy team where everyone can rise to the occasion when they feel like they're connected. They can close their eyes and pass the ball and know that the other person's going to catch it. If there's no internal politics with the coach and the captain and the management team, that's when you really see things fly. And what's remarkable is that this concept of empowering businesses through optimizing your human capital, which is a very economic way of saying looking after your people in a decent way, it's amazing how slow the understanding of that, what I call well-being economics, has been understood. And I think that's a throwback to the industrial age, where you had a job, you get out there, you be grateful for it, you take your pay home, and you cut some bruises, don't complain to the manager. And we've gone over 100 years from that world to a world now where the way in which we use technology and work with people has evolved entirely. Our life expectations and even the number of years we're alive has changed. The way we partner has changed. So this is as important, if not more important, than AI when it comes to the future of work. And I've come to understand that through this mission that's evolved in front of me, that now we are trying to, do our part for. And hopefully we're not just producing a product that works, but generating almost a science or a vertical or a category that needs to be understood and prioritized at the highest levels.
There seems to be, help me reconcile this idea. I think that there are some industries, not all industries are born the same. Not all organizations are the same. And there seems to be in some, and I'm sure you've met some of these people as well, I've met many of these individuals, that high achievers, there is almost they are paid for their resilience. They are paid for their capacity to work outside the defined hours. They are paid, and they know that even though they are told that their job is 9 to 5, they know that their job is 9 to whenever it is it takes to get the job done. And there is a huge amount of reputational credit and accolades that come with the job. So it's not a case of, you're making me work late hours, I'll go and find some other place or find another job. It's a case of, I need to make this work because I know there aren't that many other opportunities. How do you convince an organization like that actually reducing the amount of time that an employee takes in a job like that may actually benefit the organization as a whole, changing that culture from, using coffee and to continue to get the project done, and then using alcohol to wind down at the end of the night. And I can tell you, it sounds a bit dramatic, but you only have to sort of go out and speak to a number of people to realize, that this is happening quite regularly.
Completely. And one of the privileges of of CU Health is I have been able to collaborate with and work with so many different business owners and leaders and understand their culture and drivers. So to start with, to answer your question, is medicine in of itself is one of those professions in a lot of ways, right? We are rewarded for breaking our back historically and working very long hours and being rewarded for that level of service to our career. And then you see it the same or more so in professional service, whether you're a legal partner or running an accountancy firm. And there's no doubt about it, that high-performing mentality will always be necessary in society. It's not something you want to eradicate, not at all. You actually, some people thrive in that environment. I clearly do, to be honest with you. If anyone's following along, my career doesn't sound like it's 9 to 5. I thrive in solving things and pursuing them to the point at which I've got the outcome, but very much not for someone. I'm doing it because I think that this is a solution, a valuable solution. However, there are lots of industries where the pathway is the person who flogs himself the most, almost sacrifices other areas of their life. It's seen as an accolade. It's seen as a badge of honor, and there are those that follow those and those that work for those people. And I think that will always be the case to an extent. And when I meet people like that, who have almost groomed their organization to follow that culture, you have to speak to them strategically about it. Not in a way that says, look, you've got it wrong. It's rather, let's say there's an organization of 50 or 60 people. There might be 5 people in the organization that are like that, Joe. And they run the risk of thinking that the way they do it is elite and the way everybody else does it, the other 45, they're sort of your 9-to-5ers that sort of, there's almost like an elitist culture with that style of work. What I say to those people is I say, what you do and the way you work as a high performer is what will allow your business to continue to thrive. I get that. That is your ABCs. However, do you value your family life at all? If they say no, well, okay, cool, that's fine. Do you have aspirations for retirement where you're not lonely or have something to show for everything you've done? You can have a personal conversation and you can have a bit of philosophical conversation. And I say, okay, well, I say, look, the only way you're going to get there is if you help. We can help you with your migraines. We can help. I can say to them, we can help you get access to referrals to specialists or all sorts of practical things in a convenient way, in a safe way. You might have put off. Your grandfather might have got dementia. You obviously don't want that yourself. Let me help you prevent that so you can remain a high performer. So you're speaking to the ego to an extent with them. And they go, okay, I get that. They'll say, it's a tool. It's almost like a red carpet tool to help me remain an Olympian in my field. Great. That's how I speak to them. But then I say to them, what about everybody else? Everybody else looks to you to create a community where they want to come to work. And they're not inspired by your 16 to 20-hour days. They're not inspired by it. It doesn't move the needle for them. What they're inspired by is the purpose that they find in their work, the value alignment in their work, and the fact that you show you care for what matters to them. Now, you can't make what you care about what they care about. And if it was, I can tell you, it'd be, excuse my language, a shit fight in here because there'd be too many egos. So at least as a tool, if you don't want to think about this stuff, at least bring on suppliers or tools that can support your team on your behalf. You need to care about it as a strategic priority. It's not going anywhere. And the remainder of your workforce then will believe you care. And I can tell you, you'll have a higher performing company. So you play to the high performance mindset with it. You don't switch it around and say, you've now got to have like a much more fluffy, lenient workplace. It's not like that. It is actually, what are the tools you need to be a high performer? Good, that's for you. But everybody else, a lot of them are going to think this way. Have you considered that? And they'll say, well, no, they've just got to fall in line. I'm saying, well, mate, they're not going to. They're going to leave. They're going to go elsewhere. And you can't just keep a people factory going here. It's actually a pain for you. So it's just strategy versus some people are following it instinctively, Joe, with common sense. Other people just want some good quality data. Others want to be competitors in the market. And if Joe Bloggs is doing something like this up the road, they know they've got to do it to retain talent. And then others really need a good strategic alignment discussion. But to be quite honest with you, it's not worth all the hard work. If they don't get it, then you move on and eventually they're going to get it because the economy will determine that.
Maybe in a cynical way that some employers, maybe they know, maybe they don't know, but they think to themselves, well, we'll use the productive capacity and the productive life of a young, healthy person. Unbeknownst to them, they're doing themselves damage in the future, but in the future, they would have reached their productive life cycle anyway. And so it's no harm to us at that point in time. They're not going to be,
Well, it depends what your model is. You could say, well, I'll take your best 5 years from you and then they're burnt out and someone else can have them, right?
Yeah.
Now, let's just be really cynical now, put that hat on. So I'll take your best 5 years and then someone else can have the leftovers. Now the reality is when you look at the mobility of the workforce now, the employee can feel that. They can sense that. And because there's so many opportunities to generate revenue in all of these alternate ways, and people don't stay at the same company for 40 years, let alone 5 years. I mean, Gen Z, millennials, they are constantly reevaluating their options. Every time it hits summer, they're like, is this right for me? Where do I want to live? I want to travel more. What do I want to do? I don't like my team, my manager. I don't feel like I'm heard. And it sounds to the old guard, that sounds like whinging, right? It just sounds like whinging, but you've got to then go, okay, no. The wisdom here is to say, well, what's underneath that complaining? What is underneath that complaining? Because the second that the employee starts to feel that way, there's a 20% loss in their productivity and effort. So you kind of have to go, well, hang on, they're not actually whingers or not resilient. the world is tough. Cost of living pressures are high, and it's no good saying, well, if you want more, you got to work harder for it. You actually need to provide space for people to think like that, to want to grow. It takes energy to want to grow. So you kind of just building capacity. It's like asset protection. People do it personally. So in answer to your question, Joe, yeah, people could think that they might get away with taking the best years away from an employee and then not caring about the long term. But I can tell you, it just takes one bad year to be burnt out. Like one bad year can actually determine the trajectory. And people these days are not going to just cop that. They're just not.
So intergenerationally, the culture is changing, right? So,
Hugely.
and so it seems like the younger demographics are starting to become a little bit more alert to this sort of aspect of things. So perhaps leadership and organizations are going to have the control taken away from them to some extent by what is demanded by the employees, by the workforce. Do you see that in a big way? Are there certain industries that tend to actually be more receptive to this, given the nature of their age demographic?
Oh, hugely, Joe. Sometimes it's like the employees interviewing the boss,
Yes.
not the other way around.
Yeah.
So you see it. I mean, it was unheard of previously. The employees now sort of say, well, what will my work life be? Do you have a 4-day work week? Do you have a hybrid workforce? What's my learning and development approach? What are the values of the company? So there's actually this really interesting thing happening where it'd be reasonable to say that in Western society, it's the age of the individual, right, rather than the community. But oddly, people want connection and community. They want it. They just don't know that they want it, but they're actually searching for it in order to make themselves feel like they've got purpose and meaning. So they're not applying for a job with a role and responsibility. They're applying for a job with a role and responsibility within a larger work community. It's how it, and they're looking at that and they're looking at Glassdoor and getting, these websites and getting feedback from other employees that have been there. And also when you look at the industry sectors, which is a great question. So we probably saw first and foremost the tech sector adopt this mindset. And that came out of the US when large amounts of capital are raised and then they're building teams and they're trying to attract and retain talent. They started with everything like foosball table and kombucha tap and Wellbeing days. And then Google were going to freeze eggs for women who are looking to look at fertility options in the future. So you saw it come out of that. And there was obviously ESOP and equity options and these sorts of things. So there's so many ways, financial incentives, wellbeing incentives, lifestyle incentives to attract talent. Australia's going to be behind, so to speak, in that mentality. Even when you raise capital here and you're looking for, and investors ask you questions, they don't so much sort of say, well, they don't invest as heavily in the team. They want to see runs on the board, like this is numbers often. Whereas in other countries, America and then Europe secondarily, they kind of go, well, who's the team? You've got to get the best talent. If you get the best talent in, then they will solve any problem that arises. So for them, talent de-risks the forecast. Whereas we sort of a bit more conservative here, to a fault sometimes, where you actually don't take chances and then you don't have any progress. Now, the tech sector started that. Then professional services were second, because professional services, whether it's your big KPMG, Deloitte, PwC, EY, they are using human beings, human capital to produce stuff all the time. And we know analysts have very, very tough lives when they start out and they want to progress through to partner, and they're using AI more and more, but it won't replace all the human beings. It'll replace a proportion of them in those roles. And they worked out that sick days, billable hours, competition wars between firms, it was who could have the best employee value proposition. And employee value proposition is a great acronym because it literally means, what is the value proposition for it? Is it remuneration? Is it because the walls are painted in rainbow? Is it, everyone tries to work out what it is and that then slowly it's fed into legal, and legal's getting there. We work with a lot of legal, but because it's a really traditional profession, the partners sort of like, seriously, they're a little bit like, oh, can't they just suck it up sort of thing? But I'm seeing more and more partners and CEOs understanding this. And where it's really, really fascinating and where I'm most proud of is I'm seeing this understood in strata management, for example. I heard a statistic somewhere in like 20 years, 50% of Australians will live in a strata managed complex. So there's more and more requirement to manage these places where half the population will be living. And that's a tough role, and it's not particularly highly paid. These people are going into quite hostile environments often to resolve problems. And in that industry, retention is sometimes like 50% annually. You're just seeing staff coming, and they think the grass is greener somewhere else, but it's not. And it's like, well, what do you do to protect those people? So it's moving then into areas of strategy for retention, where it wasn't about just pure talent wars. It's now moving into safety and prevention and protecting the workforce and demonstrating care. And the last bastion will really be in your manufacturing construction. And again, I'm seeing that starting to come through. We're partnering with engineering firms. We've just started in construction a bit, but that's always been about safety, like hard hat, steel cap boots. But we know that mistakes don't happen on site because people aren't trained properly. Mistakes happen on site because of poor sleep, mental health issues, substance abuse, poor chronic disease management, diabetes that hasn't been detected yet. It's not that someone rocks up and is irresponsible and doesn't chuck their hat on. It's that they're not on the ball.
They're not cognitively in a position to run the job the way it needs to be run. Yeah.
So therefore, it has a place there too. So it's becoming a no-brainer, but unfortunately, the profit and the budgets historically haven't factored this in as a really obvious place to invest. And so that's the bridge that we're crossing now.
Yeah. So like, it sounds like it might be a bit basic, but you tell me if it is, the idea that the younger industries with a younger cohort, industries that have a less replaceable workforce where there's some secret sauce in the employees that they have, they are more likely than not to be amenable to this idea. Then would that be a fair assumption? And would you say then that means there's a propensity to be able to target white collar over blue collar, or is that too simplistic?
No, I think that's a great line in the sand to start with. I mean, when we launched DU Health, we had to sort of almost like expressions of interest, you sort of like gauge. And I think that younger working populations and professional services just made sense. There was a bit of infrastructure in place. There was a bit of, there was a bit of pavement to walk on already because there's a bit of work that's been done in the space. And then it's just permeated into other sectors and become a necessity. We also, there are many forces in play. There are psychosocial hazard minimization legislation that's now enforceable and being rolled out state by state. What does that mean? A lot of directors don't know, and it just sounds like an annoying imposition on governance. Fundamentally, what it is that it's to say that all businesses, and particularly those that are growing and larger, have a very specific responsibility to have systems, processes, and supports in place that offset the chance of an employee having a psychological injury in their workplace. And we've worked out that those psychological injuries relate to both personal reasons and organizational reasons. So organizational reasons are obviously around things like, systemic bullying, poor culture, inequity, lack of transparency, poor governance around roles and responsibilities, poor feedback systems, and so forth. And we know that that's effectively a toxic workplace, or any of the things that lead to a toxic workplace. And then there's the other side of it. You've got people that are coming in with their own trauma, their own physical health, their own mental health issues, whatever it might be, or developing them. And if you don't help people from the inside, you're also going to hit a wall. So there's two things. There's the organizational well-being and there's the personal well-being. And when they're both looked after, you actually start to see the lift and the risk removed. So that's a strategic framework to help make these decisions within.
I was thinking as well about government and the government's role in all of this. It sounds like if there's a silent tax on productivity, if being able to start a family is impacted by the work practices and so on, and that something like this is a solution to bring awareness, to bring better outcomes, then why, if they haven't already, have the government not actually been involved in supporting an organisation like yours with financially or otherwise? Because it sounds like this is the type of work that could be quite game-changing for economic productivity if it was, widely accessible.
I'm really pleased you asked that. I didn't plan it. You didn't plan like this.
No, we didn't talk about this before. No.
I just a deep breath on that one. So the very first time that I put together the most like unattractive pitch deck for CU Health on old version of PowerPoint, I took it to the Federal Health Minister's Chief Policy Advisor. And I said, if we can demonstrate that businesses stand to profit from improved health and wellbeing of employees and deliver a solution that's scalable and helps with that, that would take the burden off Medicare to an extent and allow general practice to practice the way in which it hopes to practice more. It would reduce the burden on emergency hospital presentations to low acuity stuff. It would also reduce longer term chronic illness. It would take pressure off private health insurance and therefore a lot of the lobbying that goes. So, and then the Productivity Commission has clearly in countless research papers, white papers, position statements made very, very clear that one of the number one bottlenecks to productivity is health and wellbeing. It's all the data's there, Joe. So you're 100% right. So then it's okay. I'm an Aussie doctor that's taken huge amount of personal and financial risk to build a solution that can help solve that problem. And you would think that with enough evidence, I could write to the minister and say, look, we would really appreciate some support. We're trying to do a good thing here, or at least some sort. And this comes down to the fundamentals around investment and startup culture in Australia. There are firstly, I'll give credit where credit. There are access to incentives that are very hard to get, but they're things like there used to be the Accelerating Commercialisation Grant where you put your position in and we won that grant, which is great. We got that. It takes months and months. So whilst you should be working on the solution, you're busy doing paperwork, but that's the hurdle you have to overcome. Then the next thing is there are R&D tax credits, or tax incentives where you get back some money that's put into research, which we've done, and we claim that credit annually after doing a lot of work and submissions. And it's certainly not startup friendly to get through, but I welcome it. I would love. I mean, I don't honestly have any more time to lobby for, and if it was lobbied for, it's through pathways that are exhausting, pre-budget submissions, and you kind of like when you're literally putting something together brick by brick, you don't have the resources at hand to go through the bureaucracy you've got. And the other thing as well, Joe, that's interesting and a little insight is government itself, which employs one of the largest employers in Australia, I think ultimately the largest employer in Australia is the government. They have an obligation and a mission statement around the health and well-being of their employees. And we certainly have been approached by government, and it starts with local council because the decision-making is more agile. But as you move up toward federal government, there are panels you've got to be on to be a endorsed provider and supplier. The irony is a solution as advanced as ours should just jump to the front of the queue. But we need years and years in market and so many different certificates and things, which we've got. Like we work with ASX 100 companies, but the reality is the bureaucracy in order to get to the point where we can actually help government employees with an ethical, tax-effective, I'm 100% sure that taxpayers would prefer CU Health to be looking after government employees than other things that the government are ridiculed for wasting money on, like changing stationery each year and all this other fluff that happens when people change titles and roles and restructuring. So this is a true frustration point, the nexus between private industry and taking risks and having a go and employing people and building the economy. And then the government, I mean, I expect a phone call, to be honest with you, that just say, I appreciate what you're doing. So we need advocacy. I probably do have enough supporters now to pursue that. And probably in a year, we'd be in a position to put some headspace toward that, to create the data that substantiates a solution for the Productivity Commission's reports and says, great, we've got all this data, no one's solving for it. And also to Australia's not very good at partnering privately, like traditionally, like they'll get suppliers and contractors, but I mean, it's not set up in a way where they look for public-private partnerships. I mean, we know with roads and tolls they do, but in this sort of space, truly innovatively, it's not an area that has traditionally been explored. We're a bit too caught up in politics rather than in innovation.
So we've talked a little bit about the fact that this is a solution that really should be advocated for and should be widely accessible as much as possible. What is the solution? I don't think we've gotten into the actual tangible solution that you do provide.
How it works.
How it works, basically. Say I don't have this, but say I had 100 staff and I was looking to you to employ some sort of workplace health digital system. What does it look like?
Yeah. So, I mean, without showing you, it's effectively a clinic that's in a cloud. All of the providers work for CU Health. It's not a marketplace. I don't believe in marketplace-based digital health platforms because they're all about volume and quick access, but it's not healthcare. You're not actually taking someone on a healthcare journey to an outcome. So we made a very clear values-based decision early on to ensure that all of our people, or at least wherever possible and feasible, were CU Health employees or contractors, but directly dedicated to the organization for their role. There's our 5 actual key pillars of care are general practice, dietetics and nutrition, psychology, health coaching, and we've got executive and performance coaching as well, which is a combination of that executive leadership coaching and psychology. We've also got support around fertility and family planning. So when you log into our platform, there is sort of some pre-made, if you like, resources, which are constantly updated, and they are webinars, they're toolboxes, they're health checks, these sorts of things, and they, in very evidence-based ways, either provide personal ability to health check and set goals, or education around everything from workplace-related burnout, stress management, micro breaks, how to switch off, like very much workplace health and wellbeing, which is hyper relevant to our client. But then we've got the other 50% is on, heart health, depression and anxiety, family planning, menopause, women's health and endometriosis and polycystic ovarian syndrome, immunity. So we are hybridizing those, what are catchy workplace, if you like, topics, which are very important, but you can't just have them in isolation. You've got to then marry them up with the actual stuff that impacts people every day. They're essential health and wellbeing. Then you can book appointments with all of our providers at a convenient time. The providers not only work for CU Health, but they work with each other. So that sort of creates great efficiency where if a GP is seen and someone is getting severe depression, poor sleep problems, and they've got anemia, then those 3 things can be dealt with in an efficient way. The anemia can be dealt with iron replacement, B12, goodness sake, a referral to a gastroenterologist because it could be bowel cancer. I mean, we've got the capability to go whichever direction you need. And at the same time, that employee can see a psychologist and receive support there. So they're kind of not fractured. The care's not fractured. And when you've got fractured segmented care, you get incomplete care. And then what happens is that busy employee or busy working mum or dad that's juggling 2 jobs or whatever it might be, they're not going to follow up.
You're saying the professionals are all located in different places and you're having to organize it in a decentralized approach.
Correct. We solve for that. So one of the big problems with Australia has great providers. We have a beautiful country with amazingly trained providers, and so this isn't. I'm not here to discredit the system. I'm part of it. It's a great, but the issue is the complexity of logistics often and the continuity of care. So you have a lot of incomplete episodes of care. So someone will start something and they don't finish it. So therefore they've paid money, they've paid time, but they don't have an outcome. And then eventually they get there, but sometimes it's much later. So, and then you've got more complications. So CU Health centralizes it in a digital first way and helps people navigate through that health and wellbeing journey. And I'm really clear on this. It's not just for executives or partners. A lot of players out there, so to speak, are going after the executives and former. We are for everybody. So, and for me, my view is you're only as good as the sum of your parts. It's no good being elite at the top and not every. So when you log onto the platform, there's all that access and you can customize it the way in which you want for the company. Whether it's 5 people, 5,000 people, we will customize the solution and platform, and it runs very efficiently alongside everything else in an organization. And we, or a business, small business or a large business, and everything is encrypted, confidential, and private, obviously, which creates a high degree of trust. So
for the employees themselves, there's Chinese walls in terms of like what they disclose and what their employer is able to access and all of that, right?
Absolutely. I'm the founder and CEO. I don't have access to an individual.
Yep.
So,
but then the data is available to the employers at a broad data on.
Oh yeah, at a pie chart level.
What sort of data? What sort of data does the employer actually have?
So it's it's the macro de-identified stuff that they're interested in, which is starting very simply. What are the utilization rates across the different areas? Psychology, general practice, blah, blah, blah. How many individuals as a proportion of the organization are accessing care? For larger organizations, so as the sample size increases, you can provide more detailed data because it can't be identifiable in any way. So let's say you've got 5,000 people. You can then start saying, oh, look, there are 2,700 people in the organization on the platform. 1,100 identify as female, the other male. We've had 27% of those engage with burnout-related resources and information. There's been 450 psychology consultations in the last quarter. The most predominant theme was financial stress, then work-related stress. So you can start to get these really, where we're heading, because we've had just enough time, is we'll be able to say, this many people came in for healthy weight management. This proportion came in because of sleep problems, and they're now being resolved. So we can actually start to say, well, we're actually solved the collective, going back to my discretionary effort comment at the beginning, the collective discretionary effort in the organization will be increasing, and that manifests as reduced sick days, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera.
Yeah. Okay. So would your program actually differ or change in look and feel and content-wise, depending on the industry? As an example, if you're dealing with nurses, you would imagine there's more shift work. So, sleep hygiene and aspects relating to those sort of protocols might be more important for them than other, say, more usual occupations. Does it change industry by industry? Do you amend?
You can customize.
Okay.
So this is where it's really interesting. Population health data helps us understand everything. You don't need to understand. A lot of businesses have this really interesting view where they think, oh, our people are our people, and they're not. A lawyer in a tier 1 firm typically is a lawyer they're just human beings that are getting by. So when you look at macro data, we know that people from this socioeconomic background and this type of work have this proportion of problems more, so that you can actually tailor the limits and the availabilities within our platform toward the things that are more suited for that work. So obviously, if it's a female predominant workforce, whether it's say childcare or in retail, you're going to have more conversations around family planning, women's health, menopause, whatever it might be, which has become an extremely important area to support in businesses. And so we will highlight and have more availability of that type of provider and resource.
Yep. I was thinking about the irony of the fact that we've sort of discovered, and it seems intuitively correct, that stress and cognitive load and a person's emotional state really influences their financial decisions, probably adversely, and changes the way they think about spending on their health and so on and so forth. So you're sitting there appealing to leaders in business who might actually have their own cognitive load. The irony is that they may not be able to make strong financial decisions based upon their own workloads, right?
It's a bit chicken and egg. Yeah, that's right. You got to. It's interesting. There's a lot of data that shows that. Yeah, what I'm about to say is ironic. Leaders think they're data driven. They think they're data driven, but they're emotionally driven. What they need is data from a governance perspective, but ultimately there's an emotional response to that data, and then on the basis of that, collective decisions are made, or alignment or coalitions are formed to put through decisions, unless there's someone that says makes the decisions and everyone follows. And there's different kinds of decision making sort of processes and architecture in companies, but you're 100% right, which is why we didn't start with executive and leadership coaching as a module or as a provider type in CU Health, but over time it became a necessity, because it was clear, and even the chief people officers would say to us, our leaders need support. They're under so much strain, they're isolated, they don't really have anyone else to speak to. If they're in the leadership team, no one wants to show weakness to each other. It's not like everyone leads with vulnerability in leadership positions. So those leaders need to say, look, this is going on at home, this is going on at work. We've got 15% redundancies we're going to push through over the next year due to AI. There's all of this pressure. My shareholders are seeing this. There's sentiment around this. We've got a reputational risk, was one of our managers is embroiled in a court case. All this stuff. That's not relatable to most people. And they go to bed at night and they've got that swirling around and they've got to be present at home and maybe they're unable to. So that person needs a particular form of expert to understand and go through that. And I think once you can create headspace for that leader, they then can see, if I can do this across my organization in the ways that matter for every individual, we're going to free up so much more resource.
Yeah. Yeah, it makes a lot of sense. And I think, when you hear the argument, it seems like a bit of a no-brainer, but we're here to help everyone on the podcast. And say in the instance where you've got a situation where an employer is not going to play ball on this, but an employee is listening in and thinking to themselves, well, I'm in a career that's really important to me, and I want to make sure that I'm able to make the best decisions for my family and best decisions in my life and the best decisions within my career. What would you say to them that they should prioritize when it comes to their own health, and how should they navigate in a decentralized way, navigate their own health outcomes if they're not getting support proactively from the government or proactively from an organization?
So then it comes down to the individual. And one thing that I want to make clear to all of your listeners, because I know there's a voice in my head that says, where does personal accountability come from? What about personal responsibility? Yeah. I can hear that person speaking to me. And
probably your parents too, right? Like
exactly. And what I think when I hear that voice in my head, I think I want that person to look at me and say, well, I'm clearly not a bludger, and I believe wholly in personal accountability and personal responsibility. But what I know is that life is tough. Even for the people saying, what about personal accountability? Often they're grumpy and they're not really happy themselves, those people. So that they need a bit of help. But the reality is life is tough. And not everybody was born with the tools or nurtured with the tools or educated with the tools to self-lead. They just don't have it. So you can say to someone, pull up your socks, have a cup of concrete, look after yourself. It's your responsibility. And the reality is, even many leaders, people who think are responsible, are actually very good at one or two things, but they're not very good at taking care of themselves, which ends up affecting everyone around them, their employees, their kids, their parents. So a lot of things are a facade, right? What's going on below the surface. Everyone sees the tip of the iceberg. That's the persona. And underneath the tip of the iceberg in the water is the human being. And quite frankly, as a doctor that's seen thousands of people and worked in the healthcare space for 20 years, and runs organizations in this space and sees people at their most vulnerable, even the most stoic people, the that drink accountability for breakfast, they need support. Everybody needs support at different stages and phases of their life. And so when it comes to that individual that doesn't get support from others, I would simply say to them that this is the hierarchy of things you need to prioritize. Your sleep. Sleep is so important. It impacts your mood, your neurochemistry, your capacity to function properly, your immune system, your decision-making, your ability to communicate with others. Sleep is a priority. Secondly, exercise. Now, exercise is not everyone has time for. So it's important to understand that getting your heart rate up and having that aerobic burst, even if it's 15 minutes a few times a week, that blood circulation does something to your neurochemistry, to your cancer risk, to your heart risk. So just do that. The third thing is really simple. It's to get lots of leafy greens and fiber in your diet and avoid saturated fats. That's it. Everything, if a whole society did those things, unfortunately, people are spending so much money on supplements and hacks and ice baths and all these sorts of things to find the holy grail. But those three things, now, if you have trouble sleeping and you can't do it because of your anxiety, someone will say, well, great, I want to sleep, but I can't. Well, you need help then. There's no special trip. You need guided support toward that. It's not Valium. It's not temazepam. It's not you need help. But they're the three things. So if you then want to go and get help and spend a bit of time, spend it on working out how to sleep better, create time to get the motivation. And if you can't have the motivation to do 15 minutes 3 or 4 times a week, then you need motivation coaching. Like whatever you need to unlock that, it's a worthwhile investment.
I think that's great because it's a great segue into the fact that we've got an episode with Jackie Bowker, a nutritionist. We've got an episode with Bevan Isles, the exercise expert. And we've got an episode with Simon Jewston, a specialist in sleep. And those are the three three aspects. And you can start with that and then move on from there. But I was just thinking as well, retirement planning is something that's come a long way over time. The idea about people actually really focusing early days on money because of the compounding effects of making, value judgments and contributions and so on, and making sure that they pick the right investments and all of that, and really early, right? So that they can actually intentionally have an end outcome that is compelling and is meaningful to their lives. Money seems to be very important to us, but seemingly like health becomes a bit of we know it's important, but it seems to lag behind monetary decisions. I almost feel like a financial advisor is sought more so than a doctor in some ways. So the question that I have is, where is healthcare going? And are we going to actually see prevention starting to look like the new retirement planning? That's what I'm hoping.
It's a really interesting question. I think that when you're youthful and you're making these financial decisions to have enough capital to enjoy your retirement, you're making them when you're much more able-bodied. And so you sort of transpose this vision of yourself being like, oh, I'm going to fly only business class when I retire. I'm going to go to these places and I'm going to go to the Galapagos and do this in Antarctica and watch the whales and all this sort of stuff. But you're sort of manifesting yourself into this space when you're 65, 67, 70, and you're useful and you make. So I think that the number one way to enjoy, again, I think it's about communication and telling the right story. It's got to be both emotionally relevant and evidence-based. And so if I were to think about this, when people go on a holiday and they enjoy it, or they or they're playing golf even, like my patients that play golf, the number one thing that gets in the way of their golf is back pain or some injury, something, right? So if you said to them, your back or your skin cancer that you now can't, whatever is going to get in the way of your beloved golf, then they'll go, oh, there's no point having that much sitting in a tin if I can't actually get out there and enjoy it. That's very obvious. The other thing is, if you go on a holiday and you get gastro, it ruins a holiday. And I'm not saying you can prevent that. Well, you can in a lot of ways. But the point is I think that people look at a lot of things with rose-tinted glasses where they're sort of imagining the best of every situation and it just turning out that way. But often the thing that prevents you from getting the best out of it is your well-being. and your health. And I would even, and this is just me having a guess here, I would even say your mental health is the number one thing you need to learn how to improve to enjoy money. Because there are so many people that spend money on amazing things thinking that that will give them happiness or the reward. But it's actually the people that are having a laugh in economy that are enjoying it the most. And it's how do you get that mindset? And so many people skip that step. And that's the greatest wealth you can ever have. That's why you can hang out with a couple of mates, not have to travel anywhere, and you can travel around the world together, just sitting at a pub or sitting at a picnic or sitting at the footy or whatever you're doing. It's a simple thing. This is why this stuff, the simple things are the best. People, they think that is laughable. No, money's great. Don't get me wrong. But if it's not paired with the right headspace, you might as well, give it up.
You've almost answered it. But my final question really is, and I'm sure in being in health yourself, you would have thought about this, but touch wood, you have many, many more amazing years left. But if you only had 1 year, what would you do with it? If you only had 1 year of good health?
I would probably spend half of it traveling around the world with my kids and just creating memories with them. All kinds of memories, passing on everything that I learned from my parents that I value and all the things that I've learned in my life. And then I'd spend the other half doing really simple things with them, because I don't want them I wouldn't want them to assign value to just needing to keep doing stuff all the time. This is beautiful. Enjoy cultures. Don't judge people based on their background, their religion, their all of that stuff that makes them worldly, and think broadly about things and deeply and find their passion. And then I'd spend 6 months just playing board games and walking down to the local beach and doing simple things so that they learnt to feel happy being simple.
That's cool.
That's
amazing. And there's always a tension between what you're doing now and thinking about the fact that we're not immortal, right? So bringing in some of that stuff into our now is always, if we can. Yeah, honestly, thank you so much for today. We've packed in an immense amount of information in a very short amount of time. And I think super, super valuable for anyone listening, whether they are an employer, a large, small organization, or whether they are a staff member of a small, large organization. I think there's plenty useful amounts of awareness, and also useful strategies that they might be able to employ as well. So I really thank you for coming on and taking the time with us. It's been great.
Thanks, Joe. I appreciate it. Really appreciate your time.
If you have resonated in any way with the sentiments of this podcast, we would be delighted to direct you to our website, www.itsneveraboutmoney.com.au, for more free resources and education aimed at improving your capacity to make sound financial decisions for the benefit of your family. We wish you every success, however you define it.